She's become the voice of one of the most vulnerable animals on the planet, the orangutan. Lone Drøscher Nielsen first encountered the critically endangered primate on a zoo visit as a 14-year-old. Later, she'd quit her job as an air hostess to go and live in the jungles of Borneo and set up the world's largest orangutan rescue and rehabilitation centre. Lona, tell us about your first encounter with an orangutan at that zoo in Denmark.
It was probably one of these encounters where you were not quite aware of their intelligence and their cunningness in many ways. And I was very lucky to end up taking care of two small orangutans. And I found out that they were outsmarting me every single day. Things like climbing up in a tree above the door, and every time I went through the door, I got peed on. I really decided at that time that they are as intelligent as little humans. I mean, I was 14 years old, obviously didn't know that much about orangutans in the first place, but it was definitely an eye-opener.
You've ended up, at some point in your life, you made that extraordinary decision to stop being an air hostess and to go and live in the jungles of Borneo. What prompted that life change?
I came to Borneo first just to help to collect data on wild orangutans, and I actually fell in love with the forest, first of all, because it took a couple of weeks before I met my first orangutan. Then I, secondly, fell in love with the wild orangutans in the forest. But the meeting with an orphaned orangutan that had just recently had its mother killed, a meeting with an orangutan that had been used for prostitution, and yet another one that had just been thrown out almost dead in a dump. Those series of events more or less, got me out of the chair as such.
So you've gone on to create the sanctuary. How many orangutans are there now being protected?
At the moment, we have about little over 500 orangutans in the care at the centre, but we have just recently, over the last 2 years, released 120 orangutans back into the wild again. So we have been over the 600 mark, but about 1,300 orangutans have gone through the centre. And when I say that, that means wild animals that we have had to rescue from palm oil plantations and get them in for care for a while because they were close to starvation, and then release them back in the wild.
People bring them to you? Do you have people go out searching for them?
When we first started up, it was very much us going out searching for pets, people keeping small orangutans as pets. But then as the palm oil industry had its heydays in the early 2000s, we went out and actually rescued wild orangutans from being killed directly in the palm oil plantations.
So you have the facility, and the orangutans come there. Many of them are little baby ones. And once they get to a certain point, you take them still to part of run by the sanctuary, an island area of forest. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. That's the university. They will have been gone through nursery, depending on the ages, obviously, when they come in. But if they're very young, they go through nursery first, which is like a forested area with small trees where they will learn to climb there. Then we move them on to forest school, which have anything between 8 to 9 grades.
What happens at forest school?
They learn to climb larger trees, and they learn to try and forage. We try the best we can, not up in the top of the trees, but on the ground, to teach them how to make nests. And it's also at this time that their instincts really kick in, because they have very strong instincts for making nests and finding food. And we're just trying to encourage that. Once they move onto the island when they're about 7-8 years old, that's where we're really trying to make them wild again, by pulling back from them, not having human contact except for us leaving some food for them and then retreating. And there's no cages anymore. They don't go into a cage at night. They get to live as freely as they possibly can on these islands.
So the island is their habitat, really? It's a natural habitat?
It is, yes. But of course the island's not big enough for the amount of orangutans we need to put on there. But, once they're then released into the wild, again, it gets that step further. We take the food away from them, and suddenly they have to fend for themselves.
And how do they go?
Absolutely fantastic. The whole schooling system has been so good because we try to mimic it as much as we possibly can to the life they would have had with their mothers. And I think that giving them that self-confidence by getting all that love and attention we give them when they're little, and then slowly pushing them away, just like the mother would have done. And I think that really prepares them for that life in the wild.
We've all seen films where, the romantic thing where the person who saved the animal, the wild animal, comes back sometime later to the wild, and the animal recognises them and comes up and gives them a hug. I think you've had contact with some orangutans that you've known since they were little, have been through forestry school and graduated on the island. Was it like that? Do they remember you?
Some of them do. I think there are some that you have a closer relationship with. We don't exactly encourage the human contact. And I do not try. Once they have been released, if an orangutan come down towards you, you will back away. I think it's very, very important that we totally lose that contact with them. They need to live out there as wild animals. I'm a pragmatic Dane. I want them to live as wild animals, so that's why we've taken them in the first place, is to put them back where they actually came from.
The ones that have then been put back into the wild, I think you've got some mechanism of tracking them. How are they going?
They're doing extremely well. We've released 120. We have unfortunately lost one, but everybody else are doing absolutely fantastic. And it is one of those things. We just need a little bit more help here, to continue. We unfortunately had to cancel 2 releases last year due to funding restrictions. We now have animals that are ready to go, but we haven't got the funding for it.
Okay, so you need funding, and you also need changes, I guess, to government policies around palm oil plantations and for deforestation. Lone, you're here speaking in Australia just for a day or two. We'll put a link on the website, but people can donate?
They can, certainly. If you go in and Google BOS Australia, you can get in and you can actually adopt an orangutan there.
Adopt an orangutan. Lone Drøscher Nielsen, that sounds like a great idea. Thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you so much.
Lone Drøscher Nielsen, founder of the Orangutan Rehabilitation Centre.